But Doctor herself, Dr. Ellen Wald. Dr. Wald, how are you doing today?
Oh, I am just fine.
Yes, yes, it is.
Oh,
It
good.
is. I went to California, which is why the show is late. I had to travel. It was colder in California than it was in Texas.
Hmm.
It's 70-something
Hmm.
degrees in Texas. It was 50 degrees in California.
Wow, wow. We've had an exceptionally mild December here in North Florida, but we did have a pretty cold November, so, whatever. I'm not
Yeah,
complaining.
the wind is blowing out there today. It is gusting, but it's still not that cool. It's like I said in the 70s. But
Yeah.
for those of you who all week have been waiting on the update, we did not hit what was it -4 degrees or whatever that prediction was on the 13th of December. We did
Huh.
not hit that. That did not happen in Texas. So, um, I guess that weather prediction was off like most of the rest of them are. So, um, okay, one more programming note. This will be the next to last show of the year. So we have Dr. Foreman on today. We'll be here next week, and then after that, we'll be back on the 10th or somewhere. We'll
Yeah.
let you know soon. Back in January. So okay, let's get into it. This is from the Babylon Bee. U.S. urges domestic oil producers to raise output.
That's a good one. That's a good one. It is from the Babylon Bee. You got me. You got me. Apparently Argus Media picked it up. But
Yes,
yeah.
I saw that this morning. Like, really, really, this is a joke. Surely. This is a joke, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, apparently, um, the esteemed Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm of the great state of Michigan. It's not a commonwealth, right? Yeah, it's a state. Told what did they tell? She told the this
Consumers,
is
as you know, are
yeah
hurting at the pump.
the National Petroleum Council, which is apparently a group of high-level oil executives that offer advice to the U.S. Energy Secretary. She said, yes, consumers, as you know, are hurting at the pump. I hope you will hear me say that please take advantage of the leases that you have. Hire workers, get your rig count up. Gosh, she really sounds
Drill,
like she knows.
baby, drill.
She sounds like she knows what she's talking about, right?
Yeah. Oh,
She's
yeah.
like literally about to put on her hard hat and get out there and drill those rigs herself, right?
There's shovel-ready jobs, people. Come on. Oh, gracious.
She claimed that the administration is not standing in the way of oil and gas production and supports increased output. She noted the administration has approved drilling permits on federal land at a faster pace than the prior administration. I'd like to know what metric she was using because, like, not holding any auctions for like almost an entire year and then, like, what?
Well,
I don't know.
wasn't the moratorium on approving permits for, like,
Yeah,
the first 6 months, 7
but they
months?
had yeah.
I mean, maybe.
Maybe she was just maybe her time
Oh,
frame was like,
yeah.
between this week and that
Yeah.
week, we, like, approved them all, so that's a really fast pace.
They let them all they let them all stack up, right? And then they just approved a bunch of them, like, 3 weeks, like, "Okay, see, in this three-week window, we approved more than any other administration in the history of the US government." Something like that. That has to be. I don't know, or it's just I don't know. It's, yeah, I read that too. I was kinda like, "Mm." So what's up with this export ban? I don't understand why they keep teasing it and then pulling it back and then teasing
Oh
it.
god.
Or is it not really being teased and people are reporting it? What's your read on this?
Well, it's definitely, like, a big thing to report, but it does seem like they're trying to go out of their way to be like, "No, no, we're not gonna do this," and yet every time they say they're not gonna do that, people are like, "Then why are you talking about it? Why are you bringing it up?" It's like, why are you even talking about it if you don't want us to think that you're thinking about it?
Mhm.
But clearly they realized that that was a whole can of worms, and every time they have been, like, talking about it, it's really, really bad.
Yeah, it makes no sense on why to do it. I don't really understand. Yeah, it's one of those weird stories. You'll see the headline, "Yeah, we're not gonna do it. The administration thinking about doing it. We're not gonna do it." It's like, well, I don't even understand
Why are
why
we
this is
talking
a
about
talking
it?
yeah, why is this a talking point? I don't even
Yeah.
understand. Okay. Alright. Let's go to S&P Global Platts. China data, independent refineries lift run rates to 5-month high as margins hold. China's independent refineries in Shandong province lifted their throughput to 5 months highs in November, joining their state-run counterpart parts who are also stepping up efforts to raise run rates to enjoy they're enjoying attractive refining margins. they're enjoying them. I like that. I like that word there.
Yeah.
It's a nice word choice.
Yeah, are they really? So I was wondering what this says about uh, the Chinese economy, Chinese product exports. What exactly is going on here? Are they? Is it because they are importing more? I'm just curious. What do you think this says about China's kind of intentions in crude oil?
Um, Sorry, someone left a comment. Let's not blame Russia as usual. Russia has fulfilled their contract so far, and I say this as no big fan of Putin and his gang. Okay, so
Contracts for what?
what's that?
What has Russia fulfilled its contracts for?
I don't. I'm not sure. Which,
Oil? 'Cause they ain't fulfilling them for gas. Apparently, they're actually the rates, going through Gazprom and no, sorry, going through the Ukraine and Turkey are lower than they usually are. So,
well, take that, I guess. I don't know. Then I'm trying to find this tweet. I don't think I saved it. I meant to save it. You're talking about the Chinese economy this morning. I, their economy's not in good shape. Um, and if oil prices continue to go higher, it only gets worse for them, right? I don't
yeah.
know how they I don't know how they can make a. I'm trying to start trying to find this tweet here. I don't see it. Yeah, this is the conversation we had this week with some people. They're talking about, well, look at this and that. It's like, well, yeah, right. They're moving the target. They're manipulating the number. I don't think that they're enjoying much other than these rates apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I just, like, is this like a fluke? Are they expecting to get, I mean, because prices for crude oil for China have, been going up. I mean, Aramco raised its OSPs to Asia after, um, even after the OPEC meeting where they decided to increase production. So I'm kind of wondering, is this maybe a result of China's kind of small SPR, or an SPR release? It seems like, uh, I don't know. I was just curious if there's anything to read into this, or if it's just a fluke kind of.
I don't know. Let's see here. As a contender for the Grand Puba, I guess Puba is the supreme leader. It says of the CCP, would you cut oil imports? I would do a lot of things different if I was in charge of the CCP. Just about the opposite of what they do. So whatever they're doing, I would basically do the opposite. So that's my read on that.
Yeah, I would totally cut oil imports. I would make everybody buy an EV or a scooter. I would just, I mean, when you have like ultimate control like that, why not just do whatever the heck you want?
Go all in. Okay,
Yeah.
Europe facing record low gas storage by winter's end from our good friends at Reuters.
Yeah. So this is like, I mean, apparently electricity prices are super, super high in Europe. It looks like there's like a cold front coming, especially to Russia, like really, really Arctic cold. I mean, it is Russia after all, like they are like partially in the Arctic, but and plus, we're already seeing record low gas storage levels. It says it's due to an early cold spell and muted Russian flows. Um, Also, I mean, like, remember how the whole thing did get started, which was because natural gas, um, European natural gas production was already down. So they were producing less themselves, combined with less coming from Russia. Now we've got concern over possible disruption to Russian supply, either as a diplomatic issue, or just Russia saying, "Hey, sorry guys, we can't send it to you because we need it ourselves, and we are choosing to fulfill our contracts to China over you." So, I think they're really setting up for a difficult situation. Look, the prices in Europe were up by 700% by October. British prices were up 500%.
Right. So this is the
Could you
quote.
imagine that?
Oh, that's insane. So this is the quote from the Reuters article. Not this isn't Ellen Ryan. The promise by Russia to start filling Gazprom-controlled storage in Europe to help navigate winter has also failed to deliver, with stock levels increasing by a limited of zero point 0.1 BCM from November 9th to 20th before a switch to net withdrawals began whoever they're quoting said. So that's
Yeah.
Reuters bringing
Uh,
information.
but yeah, I mean, this is the issue. Russia says, we're gonna do this. Russia's like, oh yeah, like remember when Putin was like, oh no, don't worry, we're gonna supply this, and then they don't. Basically, the only thing that Russia has promised to do that they've actually kept is, has to do with its commitments through OPEC plus. And that's the exception, not the rule. I think people need to understand that prior to its association in OPEC plus, like Russia was never, you could never count on them. So
Yeah.
just because you're used to the OPEC plus Russia cooperation doesn't mean that you should see that as the rule.
Yeah, so this is from Joe Hogden, and Joe gets a little out of boy because he predicted some price increases earlier this year. Longtime listener of the show, so heads off to you, Joe. But he says since Europe relies so heavily on green energy, I'm sure this nat gas shortage will be no issue. And Joe,
Course not. Of
yeah,
course not. You know what else? You know what else Europe is definitely going to do? I mean, I can tell like France, they're just firing up those nuclear reactors, like it's all going to be good. I'm sure it's not going to be a problem. You know what else helps? People on bicycles. They're
yeah,
gonna
because
they're
that
gonna
works well in the winter.
hook up the bicycles to the grid, and so when you do your Peloton at home, it'll just feed the grid, right? People on
Mhm.
bicycles. That is the solution to Europe's energy crisis.
Wait, isn't Peloton on the outs? Didn't they kill someone in a TV show or something? I don't watch
Okay.
the show, so
Yeah, I haven't watched the show because I don't have HBO Max or whatever it is, but I did read a really, really funny article about it. And basically, in the Sex and the City reboot, everyone's favorite character, Mr. Big, smokes a cigar, then gets on his Peloton to do a 30-minute Peloton ride while his wife, Carrie, is out at some piano recital. And then he goes to like take a shower and he has a heart attack. And then Carrie like comes home and sees him and then he dies. And there's some debate
yeah.
over whether Peloton killed him or Carrie killed him because she didn't call 911 and get him to the hospital.
Oh, okay. I don't watch the
So
show, so I
yeah,
don't know. Is
but
Carrie the
apparently,
really blonde one?
apparently, when they contacted Peloton about it, they didn't like tell Peloton that like basically this popular character was going to die after using its product. So the company was a bit blindsided when the episode came out, but appears to have quickly rebounded. So
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, so the Bloomberg
anyway,
we have an
come
article.
here for all your, Sex and the City updates and oil.
Yeah, so
And I didn't even watch the show. I just read an article about it.
yeah,
So,
yeah, I knew someone had died, and I don't know the characters. I don't know if I've ever seen a complete episode, so, yeah, I
uh,
don't yeah, so, yeah, okay, from
anyway.
Bloomberg, and I can't quite read this one because I'm blocked.
Oh,
Is the Federal Reserve
yeah,
basically
I'll
tripling
I'll fill you in.
1965 inflation parallel?
Yeah. Okay. So I thought this was really interesting. Usually I don't do Bloomberg articles because they're hard to access, but this one I pulled up on. You can like pull it up on a like hide it browser or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, I pulled this one up because I thought that it was a really interesting piece. I just have to find it. Here we go. Okay. It's an opinion piece. Okay, so it's not, just fact, but I thought it was a very
Hold on, sorry,
interesting.
Ellen, before you go further, we actually have breaking news on this.
Oh,
This has been tweeted out by multiple people. Um, just in, U.S. Federal Reserve keeps interest rate at 0.00. I'm sorry, raises. I'm sorry. Yeah, to 0.25. Removes transitory to describe inflation. So let me read that again.
okay.
U.S. Federal Reserve keeps interest rate at 0 to 0.25 and removes transitory to describe inflation.
So the big news is that the Federal Reserve is admitting that inflation is not transitory, but they're not doing anything with it about it. Is
Y-
basically what they're saying. They haven't
yes.
raised
So
interest rates. So, okay. So I'm gonna give a little bit of an explainer because one of the reasons I like this is because it uses a historical parallel, which I love as a historian. So basically, this person who was the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and he is writing. He used to be, and he's basically saying that um, he believes that the U.S. Federal Reserve really needs to announce a much more aggressive path of interest rate increases. And if they don't, then we are putting they're putting the country at risk of a repeat of the great inflation of the 1970s. And he's saying that basically what happened was that in 1965, the Fed was not that concerned about inflation. They thought that there was a lot of spending. They thought that that the inflation would be temporary, but they really didn't respond. Then by the end of the 1970s, and there were obviously lots of other things like oil crises and things and oil shortages and things like that that definitely compounded and assisted the troubles then. But inflation rose to double digits by the end of the 1970s, and I'm sure people who are alive then will remember this. Um, the only way that they basically got prices back under control was, he claims, subjecting the US to a brutal recession with double digit employment. So basically forcing, by raising interest rates and then forcing a recession. And that's a really hard pill to swallow, basically, to say, look, we're like, this is what's going to happen in order to bring prices down. And he's saying right now we're kind of seeing a similar situation as to what happened before in the 70s, that salaries are a bit up, but the sticky price index that measures prices that change infrequently has actually risen a lot. So merchants who set prices many months in advance are raising their prices because they expect that high inflation is going to persist. And if you expect it to persist, it probably will. No one now thinks inflation is just transitory. So he's saying that and there's a lot that goes into, expectations have a big impact on what then happens. So he's saying that, like, if the Fed doesn't do something now, they need to increase interest rates and keep going until inflation goes back down to 2%. But here's the problem, okay? You start to increase interest rates, the market is not going to like that. The stock market will be very, very unhappy with that. I mean, basically, like, the near zero interest rates are what helps keep the stock market so inflated. So they've got a choice: get inflation under control, or keep the, like, high rollers and the politicians happy by continuing to inflate the market. What do you think the Fed's going to do? I mean, like, there's no will. I don't see any of these people having the will to basically piss off all the politicians and the really rich people in order to help the poor people facing inflation. I mean, I don't care what Paul Krugman says.
Oh
Inflation
God, don't get me
hits
started on that debate. Go on.
inflation hits low earners the most. And so everybody else is feeling the effects of inflation, but the whatever, the 1%, I hate that term, but whatever, we can use it. The 1% isn't facing it that much. Like, it doesn't hurt them that much if, like, if the price of gasoline doubles, they don't really care. If the price of their, like, food at Whole Foods doubles, it's not really that big a deal for them. Whereas that's an absolute killer for a lot of the rest of the economy. But everyone wants the stock market to keep doing well and going up. So if they start to raise interest rates too aggressively, then the stock market will respond. So I just, like, I mean, I think he's right. And I think that there is no will in the current people in the Fed and the Treasury Secretary to actually, like, impose this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and
So
companies
it's,
won't be able to afford the debt because the rates go up. So much of the borrowing is in the US can't afford the debt if they raise the
yeah.
interest rate, and so, yeah, there's very little to no will to it.
Yeah. And so that just means that inflation is going to go unchecked. I mean, where's the check on it?
It's uber transitory.
Uber trans. I mean, I don't think we're going to see, like, hyperinflation. It's not like a situation with Germany,
No.
in the 1920s. Um, but, like, I mean, but then the value of the dollar is going to change. U.S. exports will do well. People, exports will probably do well, but I think he's right. I think this guy is right, but I think that I just don't see a way for it to change, because it's like the stock market is this, like, baby, and they won't. they can't deign to like realize that it's that there's this huge bubble and they need to just deflate it. I mean, if he could do it more gradually, but I just don't see any will.
Well,
There's like Nancy Pelosi will like freak out and come after them with a knife. Come on, you could see that, right? Her like
yeah.
coming after
Yeah.
Jerome Powell with like a knife in the dark. I could totally see that.
Well, yes. I'm not going down the Epstein trial today. Yes. Okay, we got a question from a viewer. This is from Stu Turley. With the increase in OPEC production, do you still see $120 oil like Morgan Stanley? So
So I
hold on.
never saw
Yes,
$120
I was gonna say,
oil.
I don't think Ellen's ever said she saw 120 oil, to be fair.
Yeah. I don't. I don't see $120 oil now or then, even though I'm not like I think, and I don't know if we'll get to talk about the new OPEC and IEA forecast. I don't believe that US production is going to rebound as optimistically as the IEA seems to. I mean, like they're saying, like we're going to see record U.S. production in 2022, and I don't see us getting from what are we at 11.7
Mhm.
last week to like 13.2 or 13.3 in 2022. So I'm not sure where they're coming up with this, but I don't think that means we're going to get $120 oil. I do think that inflation will play a role in keeping oil prices higher, though. More though in terms of setting a floor on prices than pushing them up to like in the $100 dollar range. So I don't think we're in danger of like going back down to 40, for example. But you know, with like with with inflation and with the situation, I mean, I think the optimal area is in the 70s, honestly. I don't think OPEC really wants to see oil in the high 80s and 90s, because once you get to that point they start to get problems. Like, I mean, we saw they don't want to deal with those problems. They just as soon sell more oil for 75 than they would sell a bit less oil for like 90 and deal with all this crap from, China and India and the US.
Mhm. Okay.
At least that's my opinion.
And Stu saying that the quote from the Saudi oil minister says
Yeah.
um, daily output could fall by 30 million barrels a day.
So, yeah, what do you think? I mean, I think that that's like
So
a lot,
we're going
but
from 100 million barrels a day of demand to 70 million barrels a day of demand.
no, you're talking about supply,
Well, that,
I think. Yeah.
but no, it doesn't matter,
Yeah. Okay.
right?
Yeah,
I mean, think about it.
that's
So,
true.
because if we have 100 million barrels a day demand now, and we're producing at that rate, well, the supply is only like what 60 or 90 days out. It's not that far. So you
Yeah.
eat that up. So then, what do you do with the I mean, 70 million barrels a day demand is 120 wouldn't even touch that. Like that's not 30 million. There's 30 million barrels a day of supply deficit. So it wouldn't be 120. It'd be like a bazillion. I don't even know what the number would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that look, the Saudi oil minister is right that we're in danger of, like, our supply is in danger because of a lack of investment.
Mhm.
That's clear. I'm not sure that his prediction of like, oh, we're going to be short 30 million barrels a day is correct. In fact, I'm sure it's wrong, because all of these predictions and stuff are always wrong. But I think that it's important that he's saying this, because someone needs to counter what is being
Sure.
said by these other organizations, which are not raising alarms. And at the very least, he is raising an alarm. I mean, say by June, say Morgan Stanley is right. Say we do get $120 oil in June. Is that enough to spur massive investment and drilling, or will it be because we've got other forces like acting on oil, like massive inflation,
Mhm.
and that kills demand? I mean, I'm like throwing around a scenario, like if we look like we're actually going to get there, will we see some really serious investment?
Maybe, but we're also. I think the thing that's going to be interesting. Let's say just we're going into June of next year, and we're at 105, and they're saying okay, we're going to go to 120. Okay, well, one of the things that we've seen now, as from the COVID stuff, is that we do respond to things a little differently now, and so encouraging workers to stay at home or for less flights is something that's quite possible. So you could see workers saying, "You know what? I'm not going to drive anymore to the office. It's too expensive. I'm just going to stay at home and work." And so you could see demand fall off for something like that. So
Hmm.
whereas before you wouldn't have seen, like in 2016, 2015, you wouldn't see people saying, "I'm going to stay at home and work." They're just going to the office. And so we have seen that some people stay at home, but now we do have an economy that is a little bit more nimble for things like that.
Hmm. That's a good point, and I think that the U.S. should like. I think that a really good indicator of that would be to see what people are doing in Europe, where gasoline prices are a lot higher. Like, I know that that's something that Samir Madani was talking about in Sweden, with gasoline prices and electricity prices getting really high there. The question, they're making these calculations: do I stay home and work, or take the bus, or drive? And when gasoline gets to be a certain amount, yeah, you can people are going to be making those choices, and it'd be interesting to see what people in Europe decide. And potentially, I mean, I know obviously the mentality is not the same, and the layout isn't the same as the US, but it could provide some type of indicator for how at least some Americans may adjust their behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Let's see here. We have time for maybe one or two more. Let's see for Dr. Foreman comes on. Yeah. Okay. European Union stands united on Russia sanctions. Top diplomat says. Oh boy. Okay.
I thought this was a good way to introduce the topic. Like, is this a thing we need to be concerned about? Like, is this a thing? Could there possibly be some kind of sanctions action against Russian energy over the Ukraine issue? What's your read?
Oh well. There definitely could be anything of. I mean,
I mean, do you think it's likely?
so no, you're not talking about military conflict, just strictly some kind of financial
Um,
sanctions, right?
well, like well, I don't think like the U.S. I think if there's a military conflict, I don't think the U.S. is going to respond militarily. I
Mhm.
think they'll respond with sanctions. Same with most of the EU. So, like, do you think that this is something like? But here's the thing: once you start to sanction Russian energy, they put themselves at risk. So, do you think that this is something that they're like? Are they making an idle threat, or would they really follow through?
Um, I don't know. I mean, if you sanction them, do the here's what'll happen. We're gonna sanction them, and then they'll approve Nord Stream 2. That's what's gonna
They'll be
happen.
like, "Oh yeah, actually, all that crap about the regulators and everything, we're gonna waive it."
Yeah, yeah.
That would
We're
be
gonna sanction you guys, and
hilarious.
then we're going to. I don't know. I don't really have a read on whether Biden is gonna sanction them with hard hitting stuff. What's your thoughts?
The thing is that like the fact that they've like talked about it as like realistic just seems really bizarre, because it's really like not a likely thing. I mean, the US imports Russian oil.
Right.
So that means the US is cutting out Russian oil, Venezuelan oil, and Iranian oil from at least from itself. I think that a lot of places are not going to follow along. China obviously won't, but I just can't. I don't think that. I mean, I think that they think they don't have any other options. A lot of people think it's ridiculous to think that Russia might invade, that Russia would invade Ukraine in the winter. I wouldn't I wouldn't put it past them to like, send some kind of like mercenary force in to like wreak havoc or do some damage. But I don't know. And maybe like I don't know, maybe this is a little conspiracy theorist of me, but like maybe the troop buildup is like a red herring, and they're really just gonna like send in some like they're gonna like pay some mercenaries to go and like sabotage some stuff. I don't know. What do you
Mm,
think?
yeah, I don't. I just Yeah, as I said before, I think so much of this is just the U.S. is it's not really much of the U.S.'s interest, and we as a nation waste a lot of time chasing boogeymen that aren't really there. So, um, should we protect the Ukraine or not? And it's like I said, what last week or 2 weeks ago. We're wanting to block the Nord Stream 2 because of things that Russia's doing, not because we fundamentally believe the pipelines are bad or good. Whereas in the U.S., we're arguing that we don't want to do this because pipelines are bad. So I don't. I mean, there's no consistency in any of this messaging, and so I don't. It's kind of hard to predict what they're going to do because they don't really believe so much of what they say.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in Europe, they claim to be blocking Nord Stream 2 just because, like, Gazprom hasn't, because of like regulatory stuff where they haven't like set up a different operator and their company isn't different enough. So, you know,
I do wonder with the long lasting sanctions of Iran, and we've seen a lot of workarounds with China, how effective China the sanctions would be versus in 2014 when we did it.
yeah, I don't think these sanctions would be effective at all. Honestly, at the same time, I mean, I don't think Russia will invade Ukraine in the winter. So I think it's all just, academic in a sense, posturing.
Well, I don't have my European map pulled up, much to big orange chagrin.
I have
Uh,
a globe
you
here.
do have a globe.
I do have a
So,
globe. Yeah.
so if you
Here.
invade, there we go. For you, so if you invade the Ukraine, right? Where would you go beyond that? Slovakia, Hungary. I mean,
Well, the
Poland?
Ukraine, well, there's Belarus, there's Poland. The Poles are quite concerned. Here,
Yeah.
let me see if I can get it on here. Can't. Romania. Yeah, I think Poland is probably the big one. I think really that the Ukraine is more valuable to Russia because of the Black Sea. Remember what Russia always wants? Russia's
um,
Russia always wants a warm water
right,
port,
yeah.
especially now that there's like massive Arctic ice and like all their ports have frozen over. It was like just last year they were like, "Oh, Russia doesn't care about it because global warming and like its Arctic ports are nope, they're all frozen."
All right, we have
Turkey will
Dr.
be concerned.
Dr.
All right,
Foreman
let's
in the
put the
green
globe
room.
away.
Let me see if we can bring him in here. There he is, Dr. Foreman. How are you doing, sir?
Ryan, Ellen, great to see you.
Good to
Yeah,
see
good to
you.
see you.
With my Amazon box right back there off camera. That's lovely. That's good professional podcasting right there. Let me slide over.
Oh, but now you really can see the globe.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
For
We were
some
we
reason
were
it goes
having a
to,
little geography lesson.
there we go.
Where's
I'll just come back
Ukraine?
to the small view. Put Dr. Foreman in the middle here. How's it going today, sir?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Apologies for last month with the
Oh,
it was travel or something that got us
Yeah.
messed up, but it's good to get you on. I guess for the last time this year, and we kind of broke a streak. We had you on for like every month for there's one listener. He goes, "I count my months by when Dr. Foreman comes on his podcast."
aw,
And so you
well,
weren't
thank you.
on. It kind of had us all threw off there for a little bit. So it's good to get you on to close out 2021. Let's just start here. We've got okay, so we got your your quarterly industry outlook, your monthly statistical reports, but I just want to start with an overview of 2021, things that maybe caught you off guard, surprised you, things that you think that you were you thought might happen that did happen. Give us kind of a broad overview of the year.
You know, being a primary data source as API, we survey this up to 90% of the industry each week. And I think that's given us a leading edge on really the thing that's been surprising is seeing just how resilient demand has been along with the economy. And we've seen it. I mean, we see it in the monthly statistical report that's coming out tomorrow. We see it in the quarterly and EIA's estimates that global demand is basically right back where it was in 2019 at the same point. We see it in EIA's release today. My goodness, over 23 million barrels per day of US petroleum deliveries. That's 6% above the same week in 2019. So, it, that's just outstanding. And it shows how strong the economy is on the heels of all the stimulus that's happening. Now, the other thing that's been surprising is the dearth of investment. I think that's caught people in the industry and broadly off guard. We've been on the leading edge of really tracking and monitoring that and seeing and trying to explain the implications of this gap. Because if you don't have investment, you don't have drilling, you don't have production. And by the way, it's not a stretch that if you look over the last couple of years at IEA, the International Energy Agency's estimates that oil globally declines 4 to 6% per year. I mean, that's 8 to 10 million barrels per day or 8 to 10% over a couple of years. You can't catch up from it easily. So that, then you start doing the calculus of what barrels are sitting around that could be redeployed. And if the US is the only other place you can go, Where do you get that? And then the surprising thing, I think, on top of this is just the political shift this year and how some of the official estimates, which haven't been alarmist, have been almost trying to talk the market down, especially on an international side there. So, I think we're objective arbiters of taking the data as they come. It's shown no question economic demand strength, no question that the supply side has really struggled to keep up for a myriad of physical, financial, and policy reasons. And that to me, I think, is the most important implication of everything we've seen.
Ellen, I'll let you take next one. I closed out my tab by accident, so go ahead and I'll come back.
Sure. Okay. So some of the things that jumped out at me when looking at the monthly statistical report, because I guess we'll tackle that first, um, were obviously the very strong demand that we saw in November. But also, I want to talk a little bit about trucking because you
Yeah.
indicated that trucking really was driving the highest distillate demand, and we've definitely talked a lot about trucking and bottlenecks and things like that. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what we can learn from this data about trucking and what that might tell us about this situation.
I think we've learned a lot about supply chains in general through this downturn. And coming off of it, first congested ports, and then now the deliverability of so many goods at the same time that the retail model has really shifted in America, where you got a lot more online retailing. So, surprisingly, when we look at the mix of total petroleum demand, it's not surprising that people are, the gasoline side is slightly down, a couple of percent down compared to the same point in 2019. The diesel side, because of freight trucking, is up. We're still down on jet fuel, and we're up substantially in terms of the materials, the intermediate products that are finding at petrochemicals. But the trucking side has continued to be buoyant, partly because of the retail model, partly because as you get just more goods needing to move through complex supply chains, this is the way that they're moving, increasingly on truck. And the freight shipping
So
rates have reflected that as
yeah.
well.
And one of the things I guess maybe to comment on that is before, we used to also look at diesel as an indicator of industrial output. And if trucking is taking a larger share of that, how does that change the way we can use diesel as an indicator of economic growth?
It's a great question. We can't easily, except for very much in arrears, decompose how much fuel oil has gone into the industrial side as opposed to the trucking side. I think it's pretty clear the trucking side has been the main impulse through the downturn last year. The industrial side was likely, along with broader industrial production, under some pressure, but has come back a bit this year. Now, the question is whether you get some price repression that's happened with how much of this is contributing to broader price inflation, and can industrial activity continue to rely on liquids, or do you start to substitute for natural gas and other things along the way?
One other thing I'd like to get your take on is the role of inflation in all of this. It's something that I guess we recently talked about on the podcast, and I'm also writing about it for my column this week in investing.com. So I'm kind of focused on it. But how do you see inflation? Do you see fuel prices driving inflation, or are they more being impacted on by inflation?
It runs both ways, but I mean, the primary thing is it is contributing to inflation. There's no question about that. But even if you take volatile food and energy prices out, the core price inflation is still quite escalated. So the number from Bureau of Labor Statistics for November was 6.9% year on year. That was the headline number. There's no question that as you get energy being elevated as part of that, that it's an important component that affects 20 to 30% of your food costs at the end of the day because of chemicals, fertilizer, transportation, feed, all of those things that have energy components in them. Now, the greater issue with 6.9% is not only did it exceed expectations, but when you multiply it by the average expenditures across the US, for an average household based on the 2020 expenditures, which are the most recent that we have from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and their Consumer Expenditure Survey, that translates to more than $350 per month for the average household. And you know what? Based on the distributional data that are in the Consumer Expenditure Survey, it would say that 40% of US households already spend as much or more than they take in after taxes. So that means 40% of households don't have an extra $350 a month. And this is, as economists, we like to look at the aggregate statistics and read the tea leaves, right? So the aggregate statistics would say household savings has been pretty healthy, and that there's this headroom to manage these pinch points despite the fact that price inflation's up. But the ground up data would say that this is a real pressure point for households, especially going into a holiday season. So I'm concerned about it because a lot of our reading of the energy data, if we're looking out the next year or two, it starts with the economy. And fundamentally, the economic numbers, despite COVID, despite price inflation, despite slowing in China, despite the wearing off of fiscal stimulus, on down the line, all of these concerns factored in, the consensus, Bloomberg consensus, IMF, and other estimates are still, instead of 5% growth or close to it this year globally, they're down to 4.2 for next year and 3.2 the year after that. So above average, no question, for the next 2 years. If you get that, there's no question, based on just what we saw through the downturn and the rebound so far, that economic and oil demand and natural gas demand are intertwined. Hence, you can do the math and you can figure out, based on the elasticities, that you need more and you need more, and you can't have record low investment or close to it. And even for the third quarter, this divergence with investment, it did go up, capital investment industry wide quarter on quarter, but it's still the fourth lowest quarter in history. You know, we had $43 billion worth of investment in the third quarter industry wide compared to $72.3 billion at the same point in 2019. So that's a huge divergence. And this says if the economy stays on track, despite the recent reprieve in prices, everything we've said about the fundamentals over the last year is very much intact. And it's just a question of, how do you get from here to there and make supply and demand, knowing that they're going to re-equilibrate and meet? How does that work out? Or alternatively, these pressure points and the consensus estimates on the economy may not be correct, and the economy falls back and some air comes out of that. And that's what we have to watch, because from the ground up, the numbers on price inflation are concerning. Those have affected the University of Michigan's consumer sentiment survey in a meaningful way. So last month, we saw the biggest drop, or a drop to a 10-year low, in consumer sentiment. And historically, consumer sentiment in the US affects the real economy and the way consumers feel and actually spend. There's quite a correlation between spending growth. This is something we highlight in the quarterly, spending growth, and the way people report in that particular indicator of consumer sentiment. So these are important potential forks in the road, if you will, in terms of, are the economic numbers on track or aren't they? Right now, the economic indicators, the leading ones, there's some rebound in the preliminary numbers for this month in consumer sentiment. The industrial side has continued to look strong. And the distillate numbers, as you mentioned, as an economic indicator, continue to look strong. So that is the read that says, okay, it looks like things are still on track, but we have to watch for potholes here.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that U.S. Energy infrastructure investment. You have a number here. It says 148 billion of estimated industry projects under construction, and that's down from 288 billion of Q4 of 2020. So basically, 140 billion off the mark. And you have 5 categories: LNG, petrochemicals, facilities, refinery expansions, pipelines. Okay, so this 140 billion is we're all kind of off the number. Where is that? Is that equally divided? Is it from one segment more than another? Do you have any read of where that is and why that might be?
So great question first. So the prior numbers I mentioned about the flow of investment are looking at the quarterly reporting of capital expenditures by companies from the
Mhm.
ground up by sector. And then the other way we track investment is looking at midstream and downstream. So this is pipelines, processing, storage, export facilities, refining and petrochemicals, all of that. So
Mhm.
midstream and downstream facilities. And to have the better part of $150 billion of them currently under construction, if this was 20 years ago, you'd be saying, wow, that's a lot of oil and gas projects under
Right.
construction. But to be down from 288 billion from the end of last year is tectonic in terms of
Right.
the change. And if you think of this as a funnel of things going in and things coming out, We've had anything that was past the point of no return. People have invested to try to get value for that and finish it. We've had delays and cancellations, but very few new projects coming in. The biggest changes we've definitely seen some LNG projects and pipeline projects get canceled. Some of the refinery expansions, petrochemicals, it's less cancellations than it is that some of those expansions have just been completed. They've been in the course for 2 to 3 years here. So those are the big changes. And we need to watch now, because with the administration starting 2 months ago, floating the idea of rebanning crude oil exports or limiting natural gas exports, this was Secretary Granholm. The Biden administration only clarified this last week that, okay, that's off the table in terms of the crude oil export ban. But, that has a chilling effect on investment today when you say, oops, I might ban this. How do you invest or move a $10 billion, a couple of trains of LNG exports
Right.
forward if that's the environment that the administration is floating?
Right, because these and the permit times on these projects are quite long too normally. So it's not as if you can say, "Hey, we're gonna turn it on, turn it off." Once you stop, you've lost years.
Absolutely. It takes years, and it's years to catch up. And we have to keep in mind that, when we look at it, the majority of global energy investment is primarily drilling upstream development. Okay.
Right.
So upstream and global integrated companies that have large upstream components. And of that, if we're looking at the drilling activity as corresponding with that investment trend, we're still down the better part of 30% from where we were at the same point in 2019 in terms of oil drilling, and a little bit less than that for natural gas in the United States, and a lot more than that actually internationally for gas. And
Mhm.
this is why, as much as we talk about focus on oil, international gas markets right now are a fascinating microcosm of what happens when you have a complete disconnect between supply and demand. So I don't know if you noticed yesterday's spot price in the Netherlands. It's like $42 per million BTU. We've never seen that, especially before any abject cold winter. In a cold snap in January, you might get a spot cargo in South Korea or Japan that goes for that. But now you have a 20% plus increase in China's gas demand. You have critically low Russian gas inventories, underperformance by renewables, the United Kingdom, continental Europe. They're just competing for this. So you've got monthly average prices in excess of $35 per million BTU in Europe and Asia. And here we are enjoying. We've been concerned that we had $5 and $6 per million BTU Henry Hub spot prices recently, and in the last week or two, with relatively warmer weather and a nice catch up in the injection rates for natural gas, we've pulled back under $4 per million BTU. So again, maybe a reprieve for consumers. It's very seasonally dependent, but it really underscores how regionally disconnected gas markets still remain, and how trade is not able to equalize those prices across the different regions.
One of the things Ellen and I were talking about before you got on was if we continue to see, I think someone sent in a question about $120 oil. So if we get to $120 oil, what might happen? And we had a discussion about how nimble the economy is now compared to 2013, 2014. So working from home is a lot more acceptable. Doing Zoom for conferences is a lot more acceptable. Have you seen, that's how it feels at least. Have you seen that reflected in the numbers of either like maybe gasoline demand or diesel demand or whatever it might be, jet fuel demand? That maybe the economy is a little bit more nimble than it has been historically. So if we did see a surge in oil prices, which would impact price of the pump, people might be, hey, I'm working from home, and everyone's going to be cool with that.
The demand numbers being as strong as they have been don't suggest that there's been price repression as we've gone up to recent prices. If we were treading back to 2007, 2008 kinds of levels in real terms, adjusting for price inflation, I
Mhm.
think you'd have the same concerns. And households respond to two things, both the level and the rapidity of the change. So when you get a sudden change, it's really hard to adjust your household budget for large changes in a short period of time. And that's basically what we've seen from last year, where people got briefly accustomed to historically low prices and now, have seen the highest prices for some petroleum products since 2013.
Mm. Okay. One more question, just going back to, with that being said, so you have high demand, we have a lack of investment. Um, obviously, we got to get the product out of the ground before we can put it anywhere on the end, right? So how important is it on the U.S. side, at least, to have a pretty consistent expectation for how much oil and gas we're going to drill moving forward? So you have the policy side that you touched on, but how important is it that we understand exactly or roughly how much oil and gas we will be producing to help these projects moving forward?
No, thank you for that question because that really does that's the follow-up that's necessary here, right? I mean, it's one thing to recognize we need to recognize first why there's a dearth of investment. And we can start with the physical things, the supply chain and workforce reasons, and talk about how you might remedy those from a policy perspective. Part of it's COVID. The best examples I can give of a natural gas producer where they put a rig crew back together 2 days later, literally 2 days later, have to disband it because a rig supervisor comes down with COVID. They don't have the bench strength of the skilled labor to backfill it. Then they have to get line pipe and valves through Port of New Orleans. It's congested. Lo and behold, that's time is money and it's delayed. And then after that, they have to truck it to Northeast Pennsylvania, and they find that truckers have gone to work for Amazon and other industries. So you got the physical side of workforce and supply chain. Then you have at least three flavors of financial constraints here. You've got banks that up until 2019 were closing off credit lines and didn't really want to lend to the industry. You've got multilateral banks that for oil projects generally don't want to lend internationally, and that's affecting development, especially in some emerging economies that need that. You've got companies that took on an extraordinary amount of debt to survive the downturn. And lastly, to the extent some smaller producers did hedge, they might be underwater in those hedges, and that detracts from cash flow to be able to invest and grow. So all of those reasons we've covered: supply chain, workforce, financial, and now you have the policy reasons where most industries needed some help coming out of the recession to get back on track. And instead, this industry's been in has not asked for handouts, has been working on its own to get back on its own 2 feet, and frankly has had a lot of headwinds to overcome along the way. The policy headwinds include resistance to infrastructure, pulling out pipelines, no access to new drilling on federal lands, making it more expensive or arduous to do that, announcing that they want to all but remove natural gas from the power sector over time and get half of US electricity from solar over time. It's hard to make long-lived investments in the industry against those headwinds when it's pretty clear from a demand perspective, Americans need it. And the biggest, if you're just flipping a switch, the biggest, most stark change is to just observe that domestic crude oil production is still down the better part of 1.5 million barrels per day from where it was in late 2019, early 2020. You want to know why your prices are up? Well, domestic production's down because of that gap. Your crude oil inventories are below the 5-year range right now. So are your total inventories, by the way. And your import dependence has risen. So instead of contributing barrels onto the global market, we're now sucking barrels off of the global market on net for petroleum. And that has a cost. You controlled your own fate with some modicum of energy independence, and now we've kind of frittered that away. And actually, what we're looking at for a transition, and this isn't to impugn the transition because it's happening and it should happen on a market basis, but if you force it the wrong way without market price signals to make it happen, what you end up with is potentially just import dependence for more of these components. So we really need to be careful what we're asking for and have cogent policies that think through the affordability issues all the way to the bottom line for consumers here.
I wanted to kind of follow up a little bit on the import-export situation because, in November, obviously we've now switched to being a net importer of petroleum products. We've been that way for some time. But in the EIA data that was released just today, we saw a big jump, in fact, in U.S. oil exports. And I'm wondering whether perhaps that's maybe a result of the SPR releases. Are we actually just exporting a lot of this crude oil that was purchased from the government? Is that where do you see basically, U.S. exports? Is there a mentality of quick export it while we still can, despite the attempt at reassurance by the administration?
Well, let's take the numbers for a sec, because the exports on the petroleum product side for the weekly petroleum status report that
Mhm.
came out this morning are down 900,000 barrels per day. So from
Huh.
5.3 million barrels per day last week to 4.4 now. And then if we turn to the crude oil side, um, the net imports of crude oil actually dropped for the week from 4.2 to 2.8 million barrels per day. So that's a 1.4 million barrel per day drop. And that basically, you, on the crude oil import part, we need to smooth that out, because that's just
Mm.
what refiners are taking and with what time. The export side has some of that too, but what we have seen now is one, two, three, four, last 4 months consistently averaging about a million barrels per day over the last 4 weeks of net imports for petroleum. So look, the thing that concerned me and popped out for the MSR, the monthly statistical report this month, was EIA's short-term energy outlook projecting that U.S. crude oil net imports could rise by 26% next year, or another 900,000 barrels per day. You know,
Wow.
so EIA, you're telling me the U.S. is going to expand its liquids production by 1.4 million barrels per day. And by the way, to be an informed consumer of this deal, you have to read it as they and EIA are not necessarily saying the market goes to a surplus. They're saying if OPEC magnanimously puts on more than 3 million barrels per day of new supply, and the US steps up with almost 1.5 million barrels per day of new liquid supply next year, then global oil markets balance. That's the
Oh,
way to
yay.
read their outlook. Yeah. And look at the drilling activity. If you're down 30% in drilling from where you were at the same point in 2019, you can do the math.
I mean, this is what I've been asking. You look at the OPEC MOMR that came out. You look at the
Yeah.
IEA one, and they keep saying, we expect that there will be record U.S. Oil production in 2022. And I'm saying, oh, really? Like, where are you getting
Yes.
that? Like, could you
Uh-huh.
at least give me a source? Do you have some sort of intelligence that the rest of us don't have, or are you just like taking what the EIA says and putting it into your forecast? And it was very disappointing to me that in the like Q&A segment of the IA, that they not only didn't address that, they just kind of like brushed off the fact that they said that, and pretended that they'd like said the opposite, which was very concerning to me, because that's it's all dependent on that. If we don't see, I mean, they also thought that we'd see increases from Russia and Brazil and Canada, and I think there's definitely some optimism in Canada, but they have a lot of problems with like getting the oil out of Canada. So I just, I it's hard for me to believe these forecasts when we're seeing this. Sorry, I didn't mean to pontificate, but
No,
thoughts on this?
absolutely, I agree. And I think one of the most stark contrasts was when the International Energy Agency released their World Energy Outlook 2 months ago. Fatih Birol appeared on Bloomberg, and he basically said, "I don't see a shortage of investment." Verbatim, we only need more investment in clean energy. It's like, we're tracking the investment. We see it's historically low. And I don't know how you can't say that you don't need a lot more investment to meet the world's demand here, so long as the economy stays on track. Now, if you have a radically different economic view,
Mm.
one towards contraction and recession and not advancing human and economic development, that's a different view. But you know, it's it's quite a policy conundrum, because especially when it comes to emerging markets and lower income developing countries, the IMF fiscal monitor actually does an awesome job with this. You can take apart the sensitivity of these economies to interest rates, foreign exchange rates, fiscal balances, and see that, if you get policy moves in the wrong direction, there's a fragility here where you saw the Turkish lira, make a 3 or 4 standard deviation move literally in recent months, or last month or so here. Nobody is saying these little bubbles are systemic at this point, but you have to watch it, and you have to see if interest rates move, what is the implication? There's more macro content in our quarterly than there typically is, because these are really prominent and important issues right now. But one thing that steps out is, the U.S. stands out in a very negative way right now, both in terms of over 100% net debt expected by IMF through 2026 to careen out where others are flatlining or controlling their deficits at this point. The federal budget deficit that goes with that, IMF also compares the dependence on short-term financing that's needed to float those deficits, right? And today, the US has no trouble placing its debt. It has plenty of fiscal headroom, but it's second only to Japan in this regard, in that it relies on short-term financing to float 45% of that debt based on IMF's estimates here. So this is fine until the day that it isn't. If Congress plays chicken with the debt ceiling, for example, between now and February, watch what happens. If you get a debt downgrade, if you ban crude oil exports and you suddenly take 3 million barrels per day of US exports off the market, there's a scenario right there that could tip the world back into recession, because day one, in the US, you might be happy in the very short term because you would trap some cheap oil at home. But within a year, you would see supply contract to meet the lower demand domestically. And internationally, almost instantaneously, it would be like the Abqaiq attack in Saudi Arabia back in 2019. You take 3 or 4 million barrels per day off the market instantly. You pressure markets at a time when the US is not there as a cushion to supply more to global markets. OPEC, already in the math we're doing, has some tightness next year if the economy stays on track. And instantly, the east and west coasts of the United States that depend on imports then would see higher prices as a result of that. And I think the realization of this is why the Biden administration has stepped back from the ledge and said, no, we're not going to ban exports again. But they haven't come out and said, well, we're not going to do that with natural gas. We're not going to limit natural gas exports. We need to see, at the same time, our allies are really dependent in needing more natural gas right now.
And not only that, but we've seen a whole bunch of new natural gas projects just, coming online, just being authorized. I mean, the LNG sector in the US is really primed for growth right now. So it would be a huge, huge issue if we did see that.
It is, and the big misunderstanding is that the knee-jerk political reaction is intervene in markets and blame somebody. And what's getting blamed are the exports for higher prices domestically. And that's not right. These projects beget their own incremental investment, production, jobs, economic growth, all the rest. At day one, when you start up a new LNG terminal and offshore that gas, because it takes time to spool up, build a drilling program gradually. The day that you offshore that gas, it's going to take time for the drilling program to adjust and for markets to adjust. But if you look over 3 or 5 years, you don't see any significant correlation between rising exports and rising gas prices domestically, because supply has grown, and our reserves in that area are so great. The economic opportunity is so great. We need to continue to support that and the infrastructure to go with it. But I fear with the current administration, that's something that may be under fire because it's an easy political target.
Okay. All right, Dr. Foreman, we are up against the clock.
Yeah.
This has been wonderful. I do have one quick question for the listeners. I think that my friends in Africa get left out of this future supply demand oil discussion. I know that's something that you work on as well. Where is a good resource for people who might want to investigate some of the discussions that are going around the oil and gas industry, and especially sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, the African Energy Chamber is an excellent resource and has a lot of information. They released in the last month their African Energy Outlook, which I think is a good point of reference. And a lot of the things that their CEO, NJ Ayak, has written
Mm-hmm.
address the equity issues. And especially in the wake of COP26, the equity issues for emerging countries are really important here. In fact, there's a breakfast tomorrow morning here in Washington, D.C. that I'll be part of that the petroleum minister from South Sudan is going to be there. This is a country that has 95% energy poverty and is basically being told by multilateral banks that they can't have financing for their oil development,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, it's terrible.
They haven't contributed in any meaningful way to global warming or the problems that exist globally, but the headwinds about being able to develop their own resources, stand on their own, develop their own economy and their own population. This is where the moral high ground, I think, is for the development of those resources and these economies. And we need to continue to support that. So, yeah,
I was trying to find
African Energy Chamber would be your best source there.
we'll link to that in the show notes. I was trying to find his book. I've got it somewhere. He's got a good book, NJ, on oil and gas in Africa, and I can't find it, but it's around here somewhere. I'll link to that as well. Okay, Dr. Foreman, it was lovely to get you on as always. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and great New Year.
Thank
We'll
you.
talk to you in
Happy New
January.
Year.
Great talking with you both. Take care.
See you next year.
All right, Dr. Wald, where will you be as we're...
Where will I be? Let's see. I will be on investing.com tomorrow. And next week, I am going to be on TD Ameritrade Network. And sometimes I do really short notice appearances on Bloomberg TV or radio in the morning. So you never know when one of those will pop up.
Okay.
rest
Inside
of
the
the
War Room, we had on Ryan Walker talking about Apollo 1. And so a little backstory there on that. Yeah. So
Cool.
with that being said, we'll be back next week.
Next week on Monday, regular day.
On Monday, yeah, regular, back to normal time.